Hello, beautiful community. Let's light our situation. We have a lit situation and we're still rolling. So, we're going to have a conversation about how we consume information and analysis about the war, but also really about all of politics and society. This isn't going to be a war update or a Kremlin update. If that's what you're really in the mood or in need for now, I'm going to see you in a day or two. This is going to be a core community conversation about negotiating the information environment based on a Twitter thread that I wrote, as always, for this community, because I only have about 12,000 followers on Twitter. So the point of writing a Twitter thread is just to concentrate my thoughts for chatting with you. And I think the least worst way to do it is for us to read it. And I'll just chat with you as we go through it as though we're having a cup of tea together. Now, what happened is that I rapidly read or skimmed a piece on Russell Brand's narcissism-mediated algorithmic self-propulsion in Prospect magazine, which is now edited by Alan Rusbridger. And I thought, interesting, good piece, but there's two central pillars that any conversation like this has to put front and center. I think we need to do it a little bit more than that article did. So that's what we're going to do. I say there is more going on here, and grasping this is crucial for protecting our democracies. Here's a quick thread on my experience as a political philosopher on YouTube. There are actually two intersecting things here. I wrote, one, a crisis of trust in public institutions and the doubt that anything is really true. Number one. So this is that crisis of trust that we've spoken about many, many times. And the second element here is algorithm-mediated audience capture. So it's how this extraordinary crisis of trust in public institutions combines with algorithm-mediated audience capture. And audience capture is, of course, something that can happen without an algorithm. You might say a newspaper is captured, right? But if the newspaper is captured by its audience in a way that's not primarily determined by the algorithm of a single social media platform, then that's audience capture without algorithm capture. And today we're not talking about that. We're talking about algorithm-mediated audience capture. So because I don't want to focus on this business of the crisis of trust, let me say a couple of brief things about it before we move on to algorithm-mediated audience capture. And I think that what's very important is that, and we are repeating this, but it's okay to repeat this because it matters so much. Citizens are feeling unsafe, betrayed, powerless, and lost. They're all separate pathologies of distrust. And by pathology, I don't necessarily mean that people are completely wrong to feel it. I mean that what's pathological is a society that reasonably makes people feel that, right? Political institutions to these folks often seem opaque, and that's why that business of feeling lost is the worst. It's the worst. If I'm a citizen and I'm furious that my government's betrayed me, or that if I'm despondent that I'm powerless to in any way inflect the political process, or I just feel unsafe in the government's hands because I find them incompetent, all of that is far less corrosive than this feeling of being lost, because that feeling implies the unintelligibility of the political process when I look at it. And then I add that the urge for truth, not wanting to be tricked by what they hear, leads people to doubt whether anything is true at all. And that's very, very important. I'm not the original person to push this idea forward by any means, but it's a very important constellation that folks end up giving up on truth, not because they don't care about truth, but because they're so determined, with such great determination, set out to not get fooled, duped, tricked. I'm not going to fall for this. I'm not going to fall for that. I'm not going to be a victim of somebody's bullshit or somebody else's positive siren songs about something I should like, which isn't actually that likable. So I'm going to be really questioning everything, and everything is going to be under question for me. And it's that desire to not be tricked, which is in itself, in a way, the greatest expression you can have of a commitment to truth, right? But it's that commitment to truth that leads one to come to doubt that anything is true. And we're going to talk more about this, of course, but here I want to focus on the second element. And I want to say some disturbing things, a few disturbing truths about algorithm-mediated audience capture as experienced by me, a political philosopher on YouTube with a main channel that's for the last few months had a returning audience of about a dropping audience because I'm sick and I'm not posting, but it's been about 250k, and funnily enough the audience that returns is growing on the chat channel. I just checked it today and we've had 200,000 returning viewers in the last month. That's to say somebody has watched the video and come back to watch another video after a break. So every YouTuber is bombarded by a mountain of, I'm going to focus on YouTube as the example of algorithm capture, but of course we could be talking about Twitter or something else. But YouTube is quite unique as a platform because of the seriousness of the content it's possible to share here, because of the professionalism with which so many people share content here full time, because this is basically, you know, after Google, the second most significant search engine in the world and so on. Every YouTuber is bombarded by a mountain of data from YouTube Analytics, graphs, numbers, tables for each video. There are encouragements, but there are also discouragements in the form of grey arrows. And let me be absolutely frank, my own mental health is extraordinary, and you feel that because even though I am sick with a physical health condition, you can feel that even in these little conversations we have, I give you energy, I don't draw energy from you, right? And I'm privileged about that. And at the same time, I'm privileged and lucky here, and that makes me aware of, you know, what it's like to be in a position where you don't have that kind of, you know, fortune of mental constitution. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that probably a majority of sizable YouTubers I've spoken with have at some point had very dark thoughts and suicidal ideation in connection with the fortunes of their channel in the algorithm. So that's to say, gosh, these things, these pages and pages of arrows and graphs, which I know a lot about. I don't look at them again because of my health issue. My channels would benefit if I looked at them more. But these things affect people, and they affect not just solo folks, but I'm aware of people who have a team around them, a full-time team around them, and they're working full-time on YouTube, and they're still struggling, right, with these sort of fortunes in the algorithm and all of this extraordinary data that probably requires a degree of distance and stability and a lack of propensity to wobbly self-esteem to deal with. So I say inevitably this has a psychological effect. It's impossible to lose sight of every way, every little way in which you're winning with your audience, and every little way in which you're losing with it or losing it. And the data often offers dozens of daily incentives to tweak your message to boost views and to a certain extent earnings. You might assume, I go on to say, that good intent protects a creator. And this is one of my really big points that I want to emphasize strongly. You might assume that good intent protects a content creator from selling out, quote unquote, to the algorithm. But I'm convinced that good intentions are not enough. If all you have is good intent, you will eventually succumb to the algorithm because of the nature of the algorithm itself. Now, the goal of the algorithm is to get you to say things which will keep viewers on the platform for longer. In other words, the goal of the algorithm is not in itself malign, but in practice, it leads to several things. It leads to creators getting a lot more definite about their views. Their views become their previous views on steroids. But much more importantly, what happens is that it leads creators to adopt new views to appeal to new viewers. Now, what does that mean? Well, remember that if you want to grow your YouTube channel, you need to appeal to viewers outside of your audience bubble. But the algorithm determines who views your videos, only showing them to people in adjacent bubbles. So if you want to grow, you need to produce content which appeals to these adjacent bubbles. So for instance, if you take as a content creator, as a political broadcaster on YouTube, positions A and B, the algorithm will encourage you to take position C because the audience who believes A and B also believes C. And this is often quite extreme. For instance, this is an example that's from real life. A political channel opposed to supporting Ukraine will often be pulled toward denying, and this is just one example of 20 I've come up with, denying long COVID, the syndromic complication people develop after COVID, which interestingly so often happens to people who have a mild version of COVID as well. So analytically, there's absolutely no connection between the two. I mean, there's just absolutely no connection. One's about pandemic policy and public health management. The other is about whether you arm a country on your continent or on another continent. What have they got to do together, right? But it's possible that the algorithm will keep pushing you to link into your message that position C, even though it's a position with which you didn't start. And this drift happens incrementally and subconsciously. I think at this point I want to take a break from the thread and just talk you through this a little bit. Now, what you normally see is not people saying, oh yes, I'm going to triple my views and that way adjust my views, my beliefs. What you typically see is a series of tiny and small imperceptible adjustments that for most people are a product of the subconscious, right? There is never a decision point, right? And it's helpful to visualize taking 1,000 steps forward, and for every 1,000 steps, just adjusting by half a degree you're heading. If you walk every day and you make that tiny adjustment, 6 months later, you'll be walking in the opposite direction, right? And I have seen over the course of probably 12, 18 months, YouTubers do that absolute turnaround. And when that happens, it's not even clear how to begin answering the question, do they believe what they're saying? Because they said, not A, and now they're saying A. Do they believe what they're saying? And I think oftentimes they believe what they're saying, actually. But it's a process that is so hard to resist that the idea that it's about good intent is completely untenable. 9 out of 10 people, if they broadcast politics on YouTube, will eventually lose it, will eventually succumb to the algorithm in some kind of unconstructive or indeed very destructive way. And the only way if they don't, the only way they're not going to succumb like that is if they maintain an extraordinary stability in the way they go about this. And that is a certain constitutional psychological quality that is much rarer than good intent. A heck of a lot of humans have good intent. So that's very, very important, that this change happens imperceptibly. And the primary mechanism that we can map out, which captures that change, is what might be called the kind of clamping to the board effect, which is what I've just described by talking about people believing A and B and then being sort of forced to think C. And we've seen this very, very much, which is why in the YouTube algorithm you so often see bizarre positions sort of clamped together. Now, bizarre positions often clamped together in real social and political life too, right? And in so many political cultures, people's most fervent commitments are a sort of ill-assorted salad of ideas that don't really, go together. Guns, God, and Ayn Rand. I mean, that's outside of an historical context of a particular country. That's almost a comical combination, right? But this is more extreme when it's algorithm mediated. So how does this algorithm look, if you could picture it? So it's basically a bunch of circles, and it's going to look something like this, right? And if you are the U circle in the middle, the only way you're going to travel from here to, let us say, here, right, is if you move from your circle, algorithmic bubble, into an adjacent one, and then from that adjacent one into its adjacent one, and from its adjacent one into its adjacent one, and so on. And if you travel successfully through a series of these circles, you may eventually get, as it were, to the circles toward the outer bits of the page. But if you can't progress through your adjacent circles, you simply cannot grow. Right? And the easiest way to think of your adjacent circles are really circles which are circles in which you find audiences who don't watch you, but together with people who watch you, watch other channels, right? That's that kind of bit of overlap, right? So for this channel to progress in the algorithm, which doesn't, and we'll come to that in a second, and it's intentional, it may need to appeal to viewers of times radio, let's say, right? It's going to be a bit of an overlap, and then the channel can progress. And then, are there then channels adjacent to times radio that one can progress through, and so on it goes. Which of course means that you can crash in the algorithm. That's to say, you may need to get from here to here, but you can't go like this. Even if you have a message that 2 million people want to see, they are not going to see it. They're just not going to see it unless you manage to travel through your adjacent audiences and get to them, right? So that's really, really important. And once you're placed in a certain bubble, that's pretty much it. I mean, it would take a couple of years, really, perhaps, to change where a channel is placed. So you might as well start a new one then. And indeed, somebody I know has just recently started a new YouTube channel because their channel hit an algorithmic crash. And that's to say, they were looking for a particular audience that they couldn't get to through this relation of funny circles. And the channel simply crashed despite 2 years of work on it. But by crashed, I mean it crashed in the algorithm. So let's say a little bit about this sort of incremental change that is sort of coaxed out of you, the YouTube creator. Now, where you and I are right now is, for this moment, we don't want to jinx it, but for this moment, a relatively, comparatively healthy algorithmic bubble, right? So myself as a content creator who does think about oneself in the algorithm on the main channel, this channel I don't, and more on that in a second, I am invited to, subconsciously as it were, invited to take up various kinds of positions that aren't mine. I'm actually not going to take them up, but I can feel the algorithm pulling me in that direction all the time. What are they? Well, they're nothing catastrophic. I mean, I'm not pulled to say that the earth is flat. I'm not pulled to say anything ghastly politically. Well, actually, I am a little bit, but nothing absolutely catastrophic. So what is it? Well, I am certainly pulled. Well, in fact, I wrote a tweet about this, I believe, today. So let me see what I said. There we go. I said that where I'm pulled is false flag. So it's apparent to me, and all the little bits of data that I half notice are pointing this out. And at this level, the financial aspect is minor, but it's there, pushing me to say that Ukrainian operations in Russian territory are Kremlin false flag attacks. Right? It's absolutely clear. And how does this affect somebody? Well, it's clear, right? Well, do I think it's a false flag attack? No. But if I'm not a little bit freaky, and if I don't have my life, my intellectual life off YouTube, I'm going to say, well, hang on, what are the odds that it's a false flag? 10%? If I think it's 10%, can't I just speak as though it's 50-50? That'll help me, right? So it's like that, right? You never jump over to saying the opposite thing straight away. Russia will break up. Russians are bad. Russian books should be banned, is what is invited. The ex-president of the United States is a Russian agent. That's a claim that's also teased on by the algorithm. Then there is a sort of a push to say that Mr. Putin is having catastrophic health problems. Fascinatingly, there's a pull to minimize nuclear risk, to say that nuclear risk is for all effects and purposes zero. That's quite interesting. And to somebody outside of our bubble, that would be a very strange idea, actually, because they think, well, surely explosions are going to be algorithmically inviting. And of course, one's pulled to say that it's over for Mr. Putin. One's pulled to say that Mr. Navalny is that the main thing to be said about Mr. Navalny, that he's a colonialist. And then one's pulled to speak as though people like John Mearsheimer should be not just argued back against, but deplatformed. So you see, nothing is really, absolutely catastrophic here. But there are these pulls, and so if you were to capture all of this, where one's pulled is basically towards saying what Mr. Podolyak says. So one's basically pulled toward mirroring the message of the Ukrainian state's intervention in the informational environment, Ukraine's infowar. Now, that's not even mirroring what the Ukrainian elite thinks, because they don't think that. They are engaged in an existential war, and they need to back that up by information war. Hence, they're going to say whatever they need to say about things they're organizing on Russian territory and so on. So that's the kind of a little bit of drift. Let me go on a bit, but we might run in circles and come back to some of the points we've already mentioned. So how do we protect ourselves from this? I say, well, my experience is mixed. I completely ignore the algorithm on my second channel, Vlad Wexler Chat. I post wherever I like, but the audience doesn't grow by itself. The 60,000+ subscribers, which is the subscriber count is an increasingly irrelevant number on YouTube, by the way. But the subscribers have preponderantly come over from my main channel to chat, right? And that's interesting, because this is a sort of not just an explanation, but if you like, a kind of manifestation of the point that I'm making, that you and I are communicating on a channel that is designed not to grow effectively, right? Or really designed not to grow through the algorithm, right? And yes, the main reason I'm not posting more on the main channel is health, but nevertheless, here we are, and I'm making a deliberate choice to post most of my videos on a channel that doesn't grow. And that's connected with my thinking about the long-term nature, the kind of conversation we're having. I want us to be here in years to come. On the main channel, I'm algorithm conscious. I've accepted that, and I'm algorithm conscious in order to expand my reach. I try hard to make the packaging, the titles and the thumbnails, appeal to a wider audience. But on the content, I am intentionally robust against the algorithm. The algorithm constantly pushes me to take positions I don't support, and these include, and here I give some different examples, that the problems with Western democracies as the result of malign foreign interference, that 90% of Russians support the war, and that wrong-headed experts should be deplatformed. I already mentioned that. It pushes me to depoliticize my pro-Ukrainian position. That's really what I would say. And this is a balancing act, and growing more slowly needs to be a conscious choice to avoid algorithm capture. Personally, I'm helped by the fact that my intellectual life is off YouTube. I wear two hats. One is kind of intellectual and the other is kind of public intellectual. That helps enormously. In other words, I don't think about politics to talk about it with you. I talk with you about politics and I think about politics, but they are not immediately, not directly connected activities. And even with the latest developments in the Kremlin and so on, that's to say, in my capacity as a political philosopher slash political analyst, I'm still not analyzing what I'm analyzing to make a video about it. I'm analyzing what I'm analyzing, and I also do community building and a conversation about that. And it's an enormous blessing, actually, that's not the case. And I think people who think to share on YouTube are much more vulnerable over a medium term to algorithm capture. And I just think awareness of this issue and the mental stability we already discussed matters a lot, as does engaging the audience in an ongoing visceral dialogue about trust. I think this is absolutely crucial, at least crucial to my values, because I think it's really important that we ongoingly have a conversation about the conversation we're having, so that you can evaluate what the conversation we're having adds or doesn't add to your life at the level of truthfulness, your wherewithal, your capacity to look at the world, hopefully. And a big part of this visceral dialogue is to emphasize the danger of thinking the right thing without thinking for ourselves. And then I say, of course, there is also love, putting your audience's interests, not their whims, first. This is very important. What often is said is there is no algorithm, there is just the audience. And it is certainly true that audience-mediated algorithm-mediated audience capture is still audience capture. But the algorithm-mediated bit matters. And what the algorithm does is, in how it serves you videos, is it focuses on session time, on your session time on the platform. That's the overwhelming aim of the algorithm. And by implication, it focuses on your whims, not on the best version of you that continues to grow and evolve their habits, their culture of negotiating the informational environment, right? So the algorithm attaches to the you that is browsing YouTube closer to how you might browse Amazon, and it attaches less to the you that is responsive to your more refined instincts that are a process in time and a part of your evolution in the way you traverse the informational environment. So yes, it is you, but I would argue it's not all of you, and what's left out is your aspirational picture of yourself, actually. Ultimately, only democratization of the internet could solve this. And I'm certainly not going to give any solutions, but let's look at this basic situation whereby an algorithm owned by a very big company, it may be a company that does marvelous things, but at the level of political legitimacy, it doesn't really have any more legitimacy than the fish and chips shop around your corner, or the brewery on the street, one street down. One's a big company, the other is a tiny company, but at the level of political legitimacy to control public discourse, to filter public discourse, there isn't really a difference. And yet it's companies like that are deciding whether you're going to see a pro-Ukraine video 10 times and a anti-Ukraine video once, or the other way around, right? That is where that decision lies. Right? Recently on Twitter, we've had a situation where quite a few people disappeared from Twitter's search, and somebody in our YouTube bubble, Jake Bro, had a real problem with his Twitter account, which was restricted, in my view, unacceptably and inappropriately. But there's absolutely no reason why that can't happen on other platforms too. So we are here so far, right? But these things can always change, and there's a real precarity about this, and that's why, of course, over time, a conversation like this has to, I think, evolve routes that go beyond a single platform. I very, very much believe in that, and the kind of bond I want to form with you isn't around sharing the same views, but it's about sharing a community that is expressed in an ongoing conversation, which is defined by certain values and defined by a certain culture, but is nevertheless broad-ranging and open, right? And goes on for a long time, and is only really good insofar as it goes on for a long time, because the conversation carries this commitment that the world and the political world can only be helpfully explored as part of a conversation that is in a process in time, and a conversation that constantly questions itself and questions the dynamics within it too. So this is some of what I wanted to say. I'm going to get out of your hair now. But the basic point is, little bits of incremental drift is what one typically sees when people set about commentating on politics in YouTube. When one does not see it, and there are counterexamples, that's the exception. These are the exceptions that prove the rule. And this process is not so much about decency and sound intent. It's actually about the kind of stability where you notice this infinitesimal turn, infinitesimal inflection of heading every 1,000 steps, and you say, no, I'm not gonna do it. But for most people, they will say, I'm so sorry, but that versus that is virtually the same thing. This direction pays better in the algorithm. This is where I'm gonna go. That's 11. Talk very soon.